Brendan, thank you so much for being here with us today. And if you could please share your screen and your presentation for us, that'd be wonderful. But it's a pleasure to have you with us here.
Yeah, thanks, James. Appreciate the introduction. You've sort of put up the expectation there quite high, but yeah, look, I've been kicking rocks around the place for quite a few years now, and really landed in a great place with Black Canyon, and looking for manganese up in the Pilbara of Western Australia. Fantastic opportunity here of manganese in both the steel industry, but also the growing demand for manganese sulfate within batteries as well. So looking forward to sort of run potential investors through the presentation, and also to take questions at the end. So without any further ado, I'll just sort of jump in. I think James has covered off on the forward-looking statements. We're not giving investment advice. Cautionary statement, I will just note that I do have information in here with regards to a scoping study we released about 2 months ago, and scoping study is plus or minus 35% in terms of accuracy, so bear that in mind. So a bit about, before we sort of go into what we're doing at Black Canyon, I just want to give a bit of an overview of the company and our corporate snapshot. So Black Canyon listed on the Australian Stock Exchange in May last year, 2021. So we're about 18 months old now, and we've been really busy exploring and defining resources. We've got about 51 million shares on issue, market cap around 10.8, so extremely tight capital structure, highly leveraged, cash in bank, and you can see that BCA shareholders, board and management, we own a fairly healthy 12%. And the top 20 shareholders own about 37%, so it's a very tight capital structure and leverage for success. In terms of the board, experienced board, and we are really technically focused. We've got 2 geologists, 1 chief physicist, and 1 finance corporate director, non-executive director as well. So, and that's really appropriate, I guess, for the stage that the company is in at the moment. Really at that sort of early stage exploration phase, and then moving into development phase. And as the company evolves, we'll obviously make sure that we've got the right people through the management, and also in the upper levels with the directorships, etc. Just a bit about myself. I've worked fairly extensively in exploration, resource development, through to developing projects. My last project I was with was a company called Australia-focused Resources, and they're currently in construction and almost finished building a $350 million plant here in WA to produce mineral sands. Whilst I'm a geologist, I was actually heavily involved in the approvals processes and stakeholder engagement, which included working fairly closely with the heritage groups up in that area as well. The liaising with all the regulators, the EPA, DMIRS, DWERS, and to get this project permit ready, and which is great. It was a great experience. It's certainly a challenge at times, but it's probably put me in good stead now to work through what we need to achieve here at Black Canyon up there in the Pilbara. As I sort of mentioned, I guess the 5 key pillars for Black Canyon really are: we are manganese focused. That's all we're looking for. We're not looking for any other metals. It's just manganese, because we see it as a key contributor to the steel industry, but also a growing component in the EV battery space. Fantastic location up there in the Eastern Pilbara, about 2.5 hours northeast of Newman. Plenty of infrastructure up and through there, roads going all the way through to Port Hedland these days. I've been working in and around that area for over the past 20 years at different times, and infrastructure in the last 5 to 10 years the development of infrastructure has been phenomenal. So that's really helps companies like us get into the market. Mineral resources, we've managed to delineate in fairly short time a fairly substantial mineral resource, 100 million tonnes, about 10.5% manganese, which is a fantastic start, but a pretty clear strategy to grow the company and develop these opportunities into mines. And the first cab off the rank is really Flanagan Bore, and I'll run through that during the process. But also looking very seriously at the battery precursor, manganese sulfate. as well, and how we could possibly do downstream processing and capture some of that market as well. But at the end of the day, experience counts, and it's having the right team in place, and we are building an execution team as well. So manganese, really working into that ESG theme, is critical to a low carbon future. Whilst most of it is used in the steel industry, a growing portion of manganese is actually getting utilised in the battery market within nickel, manganese, cobalt cathodes, which are pretty much the battery packs that go into the majority of the electric vehicles these days, such as Tesla being a prime example. So each vehicle may have up to 30% manganese in the battery, which equates in real terms to 10 to 90 kilos of manganese. So quite a lot of manganese usage in the batteries, and people don't really talk about that so much. It's always about lithium and nickel and cobalt, but manganese is certainly right up there. And with the emergence of the lithium phosphate manganese batteries as well, which I'll go into a bit further, there's just probably a higher utilisation of manganese going forward than what people are really anticipating. Key market drivers, obviously, strict emission bans imposed by governments, and those dates are rapidly approaching. So we can just see only further uptake of electric vehicles, and really to reduce those emissions. And really encouragingly, there's a lot of support from government, both here locally in Australia, but also in the US, where they've just recently announced a inflation reduction package, which is looking at supporting the battery sector, and that's from supply of raw materials through to processing, and then through to the development of actual battery products. So a lot of impetus and a lot of people just really want to help de-risk and head towards that low carbon future. And what else is happening is the diversification of supply. That's going to become increasingly important, I suspect, with a lot of these battery minerals, which most of them sort of mined in other countries, but processed in China. And I suspect, just with the geopolitical situation, there'll be a lot more countries such as the US and Europe looking to get their battery precursor materials from outside of China. So manganese, let's just have a look at that in a bit more detail and how it works in the batteries. As I was sort of explaining, the NMC batteries, there are a number of recipes that go into these batteries, but the M in an NMC battery is for manganese. And the ratios you can see there, 1-to-1 often with cobalt, but often can increase in the NMC 532, which is quite a popular battery as well. So there's quite a bit of manganese in that battery. But we're seeing a lot more requirement for manganese to go into the LFMP batteries, and this is happening really rapidly. It was only in July this year that Cattle made an announcement about the M3P battery, which is essentially an LFP battery with manganese added, and it increases the range up to 700 kilometres now, which is almost on par with the NMC battery, but at the cost, at a serious discount to the cost of manufacturing an NMC battery. So that's really encouraging for the industry, and there are a number of others such as BID and LG who are also looking at this LFMP technology as well. So I think we will see a lot more of that. But the interesting stat on diversification are also shown down in the pie charts just below. You can see mining, most of it's outside of China, then processing, 93% within China, cathode production, the lion's share again in China, and then cell manufacturing again, 73% out of China. So it's a bit like the rare earth story. I think there'll be a lot more companies looking to diversify their supplies out of China. I mean, it does make sense in a lot of ways because most of the batteries are made in China, the cars are made in China, so that's where most of it's coming from now. But I think sooner or later, the US is really starting to pick up in terms of its car manufacturing business, which used to be, used to be huge in America. And I think they'll have to pick up the ball and really start playing catch up to some extent as well. So the projects up there in the Pilbara, we've got about 2,500 square kilometres of tenure in Western Australia, and you can sort of see the tenements there, all in red, are 100% owned by Black Canyon, and we've also got a JV earning up to 75% with a company called Cummins Resources. What I'll do is you can look at the Woody Woody manganese mine up there. So we're in a proven manganese producing belt, and and also the Butcherbird manganese mine at either end of our tenement. So we're really well located in that area, and we're looking for hydrothermal style manganese, which is smaller tonnage, higher grade, and then supergene hosted, shale hosted manganese, which is large tonnage. And Flanagan Bore, we've got onto one of those really early, and we're endeavouring to move that one up the development curve. Just quickly, Oakover East is it's one of those hydrothermal high grade targets. It's about 35 kilometres south of Woody Woody. Woody Woody is a mine that has been operating for about 60 years. It produces a DSO product, which is about 40% manganese. But it comes from 20 or 25 pits, and the pits average about 500,000 tonnes per pit. So fairly small, but high grade targets. And we've got a good 20 kilometres of strike down to the south of there, where we know there's a lot of manganese. You can see the photo there, paints 1,000 words. You can see the manganese in the geology through there. So we'll be spending a lot more time on that next year, I think, and just looking at getting onto some of these high-grade hydrothermal targets. Balfour Regional really centres around the Flanagan Bore project, which I'll go into over the next few slides, but it's a regional play. We've really looked at the stratigraphy in this area, and we've identified prospective horizons, and we've gone about it, just picked up those tenements, and we'll continue to work on those. So with Flanagan Bore, you can see it in that central area of the project. I'll just deep dive into that a bit more. It's really turning out to be our flagship project at Flanagan. When we picked up the ground last year with the joint venture with Caroline Resources, there was only 12 drill holes in it. Since last year, we've done 2 drill programs for about 15,000 metres of drilling being completed. Come up with an indicated resource, so a fairly high confidence classification of 104 million tonnes at 10.5% manganese. The last drill program will undoubtedly increase that resource, and with the infill component will hopefully increase it up to measured. So very high confidence. It's got really excellent geological and grade continuity. Within there's a high grade subset of about 30 million tonnes at 12.8% manganese, which is pretty much the basis of our scoping study, which we'll go into in the next few slides as well. But having that high grade core is really important in terms of getting a mine up and running. It gives you something to get into straight away. It's all at surface, and in terms of strip ratio, it's very low. Bit more information on the individual projects. So FB3 is one of the prospects there. We've defined 67 million tonnes at 10.4% manganese, and you can hopefully see in those pictures the width and the scale of this. It's about a kilometre by kilometre footprint. You can see the hill in the little picture down the bottom. It's just covered in manganese, and we're talking very thick intervals of manganese mineralisation, 30 to 40 metres at 13 to 20%. And all from surface here at FB3. This had never been drilled before, so it was a virgin discovery for the company. When I headed up there after we listed, I was so excited to see the amount of mineralisation at surface, and really couldn't wait to get the drill rigs on site to drill that out. Flanagan Bore, the LR1 project, that had 12 drill holes in it, so we knew that we were in the right thickness and grade range. And since then, we've also drilled more holes and defined a strike of it's over a kilometre, it's 800 metres wide again. Very big zone of mineralisation, 37 million tonnes, about 10.8%. Similar in terms of thickness and grade ranges as well. Both really solid resources in ground at indicated level. And a lot of mining projects, you've got to have the foundation for it. And for me, it's making sure that we've got that resource base covered and it's well drilled, and we know as much as we can about the geology and the mineralisation of that deposit as we can. We've also drilled diamond core into this, or metallurgical test work, which we'll look at on the next slide. So in terms of metallurgical studies, we have completed initial scoping level studies, and we are able to beneficiate this product from 10-11% in the ground up to over 30% manganese. So that's a fantastic start. And really all we're doing, if you look at the photos on the right-hand side, is removing the clay and the shale bands and leaving the manganese. So the dark black horizons are manganese, and the other horizons are just the clay. And so it's really giving it a good wash and scrub can double the grade, and then after that using heavy media separation to float out the heavier manganese from the remaining silicates that might remain in there. So really good start, plenty more work to be done on that, and we're doing that now right in the labs. More metallurgical test work is being undertaken. The product will flow into the steel industry, but also looking at manganese sulfate with part of the battery precursor studies. And we recently announced being able to extract about 91% manganese out of this material, out of an oxide material. Again, a very good start. The traditional process of making manganese sulfate is getting electrolytic manganese metal, which costs a lot of money to produce, and then dissolving that to make manganese sulfate. But we're looking at a process where we can make manganese sulfate directly from these manganese oxide ores. So we're running those two strategies in parallel. We're going to generate manganese concentrate, but also manganese sulfate that will feed into the battery market. And there's certainly interest in what we're doing in terms of downstream processing. The Flanagan Bore scoping study really, summarises what we've been doing at Flanagan Bore in terms of the financial metrics, looking at an NPV of 134 million, an IRR of 67%, which is really robust. And it's based on a production target of 36 million tonnes at about 11.7% manganese. Really long mine life, 20-year mine life, and in terms of being able to generate a solid customer base for both manganese concentrate and manganese sulfate going forward. Having a very long mine life certainly plays into our favour. Getting the mine actually up and running is probably looking at a $40 to $50 million Australian exercise. So that's the project area that we've got laid out more or less, and we're doing more detailed feasibility test work over the next 12 to 18 months to get this one done. So in terms of our ESG, we're really at the early stage of that journey, I guess, and the Flanagan Bore is where we are starting it. Most exploration companies, we're really out there exploring and looking for mineralisation, and ESG does become a bit of a second thought. But as we start to really move up that development curve, ESG becomes more front and centre for us. And there are a number of ways we're looking at minimising our impacts on the environment and stakeholders. And I'll just run through those dot points just quickly. So I was actually just up on site a few days ago, and we were looking for water. Water is obviously very important for being able to process and develop a mine in this area. And we've been quite fortunate that we've come across some water shows in at least some of the holes that we drilled as part of that phase. But increasingly being able to show to the regulators that we have a sustainable water supply. We're not going to, we've got an aquifer that is able to have a good recharge. We're not going to draw down and impact other stakeholders in the region. That's also important. And also not impact some of the subterranean fauna that actually live within some of these aquifers as well. So we'll be looking at all those aspects to minimise those impacts. And then once we go into production, it's looking at means of water conservation through process design and water recycling. And we're already factoring in a tails thickener that extracts most of the water out before the tails heads out to the tail storage facility. So the fortunate thing is we do have time to plan now and get in place the pieces of in terms of conservation and minimising our water utilisation. Site energy looked really simple. Up in the Pilbara, plenty of blue skies, plenty of sun. So we'll be looking at installing a solar farm, and that can supply power for the processing plant, also administration, village accommodation. And there's a cost benefit in there as well by reducing our reliance on diesel power for these more remote sites. So I look forward to spending more time and working with the right partners in that space to get the right size solar farm set up for us. Excuse me. We're also embarking on baseline flora, vegetation and fauna studies. We see that there'll be a good 12 months of doing these baseline studies before we even go to the regulators. And that's because it's best to be armed with all the information. We'll be able to identify areas where there may be priority flora species that have been identified, particular vegetation associations, and also the fauna, particularly subterranean fauna and surface fauna as well. So those studies will kick off later this month. In November, we're starting our first on-ground surveys, and through next year we'll be doing the autumn and spring surveys as well, just to really increase our knowledge of the environment that we live in, and then we'll make the plans as to how we minimise those impacts on the environment as we go through the regulatory approval process. A lot of people talk about game changers, in terms of projects, but one of the highest OPEX expenses of this project is transport, and I'm really interested to learn more about the conversion of prime movers, being able to transport manganese concentrate from our site up to Port Hedland to the port using battery-operated prime movers. There's a company I've come across, I haven't reached out to them just yet, but called Janus Electric, based in New South Wales, another Australian company, which is fantastic. And they've really forged ahead with converting diesel prime movers into electric. So, not only are we reducing emissions with diesel, but as a potential operator in the future, we're looking at some pretty serious reduction in operating costs as well, which it all comes down to the bottom line. So that ticks a lot of boxes for the company. So I think ensuring that we can look at technologies like that, where they may have batteries that swap out, quick swap outs, and load up, deliver, swap out a battery, drive back to site. That seriously could be have a very high impact on reducing emissions, but also for the company as well. So in terms of offsetting carbon, EV, electric vehicle batteries, is an area that we really want to get into as well, and that's why we're embarking on this manganese sulfate strategy. So running that in parallel with what we're doing, on developing a mine, but looking at carving out a portion of that manganese oxide and developing manganese sulfate. I mean, ideally that was something we would like to develop in Australia as well. The capex on making a manganese sulfate refinery is not insubstantial, and we will be looking at working through a scoping study and more feasibility studies over the next 12 months. So that'll be an exciting development for the company. I have no doubt about that. In terms of stakeholder engagement, obviously pastoral country where we're working on, but more importantly, traditional owners. We've had a number of surveys at Flanagan Bore to date, and been working closely with the traditional owners, the Kalkine Media people up in that area, and the closest community is Jigalong Station, which is about 50 kilometres south of us, and we've had a lot of interaction with the Napoli people, which is it's good to see them on country. They love coming out to site and doing the surveys, and we had a couple of heritage monitors recently on site who spent a couple of nights out there as well, and from what I gather, there was quite a good number of yarns around the campfire, which was just building that rapport with the broader community as well is very important. So we do have an opportunity here at Black Canyon to grow the team and encourage the right culture, and I think that's something that we will be looking more deeply into over the next 12 to 18 months. Look, in summary, you can see through this, but we have had a really busy year, and now the next 12 to 18 months will be no different. It is really just getting out there, doing the job, ticking the boxes, getting this thing up the development curve, and hopefully looking at financing options in 18 months and get something up and running. Just the final bullet points. Hopefully I've been able to provide some of this information on investing in Black Canyon. Obviously manganese has contributed essential for the steel industry, but also becoming more critical for battery minerals. Really tight capital structure. We are doing the work, we're out there exploring, generating targets and completing drill outs, but also being able to rapidly delineate resources, do a scoping study, and now we're moving on to the detailed feasibility study. Looking at mineral processing, hydrology and hydrometallurgy, also looking to develop high purity manganese sulfate to facilitate the diversification of manganese sulfate to customers, hopefully through US and Europe. So that's about it for me. Hopefully we've provided some insight into the company and what we're doing out there at Flanagan Bore and regionally, and where we are on that ESG journey. We are starting out, but I think it's a critical part of the business and is increasingly important in terms of getting as part of our social responsibility as well.
Thank you very much, man. You mentioned it's been a very busy year, certainly a very busy presentation too. There's a lot of effort that's gone into that. So I do appreciate you taking us through all the ins and outs of